I threw a celebration for my wife, our 45-year wedding anniversary. But by 8:30 that night, the entire room was down to just 2 empty chairs. At the same moment, my phone vibrated. It was my daughter-in-law. She was posting photos from a victory party in Atlanta. My son was there. The kids were there, all smiling. Her message came last. "Dad, don't make a big deal out of this. Mom doesn't even remember what today is anymore." I looked over at my wife, and in that moment I realized something. What they wanted was never an apology. Before I tell you what happened after that night, if you're listening to this story right now, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you this. What started to change happened the moment the restaurant door closed behind us. After that moment, I stayed right where I was, at the table I had reserved. I didn't stand up. I didn't call anyone else. The server leaned in and quietly asked if we wanted the food cleared. I nodded, not because I was hungry, but because I didn't want my wife to sense that something was wrong. Rosalind sat across from me, both hands resting on the tablecloth. Her eyes moved around the room, full of expectation. She asked softly, as if afraid to disturb anyone. "They're just running late, right?" I told her they were on their way. It was a sentence I had used for 45 years. Every time I needed to shield my family from an uncomfortable truth. The restaurant grew dimmer. Other tables finished their meals one by one. The clinking of glasses faded. I realized something then. In all my years at sea, I had waited in heavy fog for days at a time. But time had never moved as slowly as it did that night. Rosalind adjusted her light blue silk dress. She had picked it out a week earlier. Every morning she opened the closet, looked at it, and asked me if today was the special day. I always said yes. And she smiled, like a child promised a gift. I opened Facebook again, this time paying closer attention. Under Sloane's photo were dozens of congratulatory comments. "Congrats on the new beginning. Well deserved after all that hard work. A huge win." No one mentioned Savannah. No one mentioned the 2 old people sitting 300 miles away. I looked at the photo. Wyatt stood beside his wife, his hand resting on her shoulder. It was the same way he used to stand next to his mother when he was little, whenever he felt scared. I wasn't angry that he didn't come. I was angry that he let someone else redefine what our family was. Rosalind asked again, "Are you sure this is the right place we booked?" I said, "I was sure." And I felt my voice crack. When dessert arrived, I finally got a message from Wyatt. Just one short line. No apology. No phone call. I read it, then placed the phone face down on the table. Rosalind looked at me. The excitement in her eyes was gone. In its place was confusion, as if she could feel something slipping out of reach. She asked, "Today, whose birthday is it?" I clenched my hands beneath the table. I didn't correct her. I just told her it was the day we met. She smiled. That smile pierced my chest harder than any storm I had ever sailed through. We left the restaurant when the streets were quiet. I opened the car door for her like I had done for decades. When I sat behind the wheel, I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to drive in a silence this heavy. Rosalind gazed out the window and whispered that Savannah was beautiful at night. When we got home, she asked why there was no cake. I told her maybe it would arrive late. She nodded, then sat on the couch, her hand searching for the thin blanket. I stood in the living room and looked around the house that had held my entire life. The photos on the walls, the keepsakes from my voyages at sea. Everything was there, except one thing, my son's presence. That night, Rosalind went to sleep early. She forgot quickly. That was both her pain and her mercy. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Financial folders. Documents I believed I'd never need to review again. I had always thought that as long as I was clear-minded, as long as everything was written down, no one could take advantage of us. I was wrong. I started with small details. An unfamiliar charge in our joint account. A medical appointment I knew nothing about. A signature that looked familiar, but not entirely like Rosalind's. Each discovery didn't shock me. It just made me colder. Close to midnight, I stopped. Not because I was tired, but because I realized I was facing something larger than an empty table at a dinner party. If they could dismiss 45 years of their parents' marriage so easily, what else were they willing to ignore? I looked toward the bedroom. Rosalind slept peacefully, one hand resting on her chest, breathing slow and even. And in that moment I understood. that this night wasn't just about a party no one came to. It was the first sign of a door quietly beginning to close. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I no longer trusted the calm I had always taken for granted. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. It was like a ship whose course had been changed while the captain was asleep. Rosalind sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea gone cold. She asked what day it was. I told her. She nodded, then asked again a few minutes later. I didn't blame her. I blamed myself for letting others step into those gaps in her memory. When she went to lie down before lunch, I began the work I should have done long ago. I laid every financial file out on the dining table. There was no emotion in it, just the habit of a man who learned to check the charts before setting sail. Numbers don't lie, but they don't shout either. They whisper. And if you don't listen closely, you miss everything. I found records from a private clinic outside Savannah. The doctor's name meant nothing to me. The bills were under Rosalind's name, but the signature on the consent forms wasn't hers. I stared at it for a long time. Rosalind always signed her name at a slight leftward angle. This one was straight, firm, and decisive. No hesitation at all. I called Wyatt. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent a text. No reply. That afternoon I found appointment emails buried in old messages. 3 visits, all scheduled by Sloane. The wording was short, clinical, and cold. Exactly how she spoke during family meetings. Comprehensive cognitive evaluation. I understood before I reached the final line. Conclusion not capable of making independent financial decisions. I sat down. For the first time in years, I felt like I had been struck right on the deck of my own ship. That evening, Sloane called. Her voice was soft, almost too soft. She said she only wanted to help. Said Wyatt was under a lot of pressure. Said I should consider taking some time to rest. She didn't mention Rosalind. Not once. After the call, I started noticing small things around the house. A new outlet behind the bookshelf. A small device attached under the dining table. I didn't need an explanation. I had sailed through waters where people hid far more dangerous things than that. I removed it. Then the second one. Then the third. I wasn't angry. I just felt a thick silence spread across my chest. Not because I was being watched, but because the ones doing it were my own family. I began documenting everything. Dates, times, calls, emails. Every moment Rosalind seemed more confused after seeing Sloane. I noticed a pattern. Every visit came with an excuse. Tea with a friend, shopping, health checkups. Each time she came back, she was quieter. One afternoon, Rosalind asked me why a stranger had made her sign papers at the clinic. I asked if she remembered signing them. She shook her head. She said the person told her I had already agreed. I stood there in silence. Not in anger, but because I understood. They were building a story. And in that story, I was the one no longer clear-minded enough to object. That night, I called Vance. We hadn't spoken in years. I said only one sentence. I think someone is trying to close my life from the inside. Vance stayed quiet for a few seconds, then told me to keep everything exactly as it was. Don't confront anyone, and under no circumstances sign anything. The days that followed moved slowly, tight as a mooring line. Sloane started coming by more often. She brought documents. She spoke with a rehearsed patience. Wyatt came with her, but barely said a word. Every time I looked at my son, I saw a man avoiding his own reflection. Rosalind grew more confused by the day, and every time she forgot something, Sloane wrote it down quickly, as if collecting evidence for the version of Rosalind she needed. I understood then. If I stayed silent, they would turn that silence into consent. One evening after Sloane left, I checked my study again. The bottom drawer had been disturbed. A copy of the house documents sat slightly out of place. I knew then. They had started touching the core. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line. They're not waiting for me to grow weak. They're helping it happen faster. From that moment on, this was no longer about a forgotten anniversary. It had become a race between an old man still clear of mind and those waiting for him to fall so they could collect one final signature. After writing that line, I didn't add another word to the notebook. I knew I needed facts, not feelings. And that was when Vance quietly stepped back into my life. No noise, no long questions. Just like someone used to watching things from behind the curtain. We met at a small cafe near the river dock. Vance arrived early, carrying a thin folder. He set it on the table, didn't open it right away. He looked at me for a long moment, then said things were worse than I thought. He started with the apartment in Atlanta. On paper, it was a clean deal. High purchase price. Paid on time. No signs of risky loans. But Vance said if you followed the money closely, it didn't come from Wyatt. It moved through a shell company, then returned as a so-called preferred disbursement. The source of that money led straight back to Savannah. Led back to my house. I didn't ask how. I only asked when. Vance said 3 months before the anniversary dinner, right when Rosalind started becoming more confused. They didn't wait for my approval. They didn't wait for Rosalind to understand what she was signing. They chose moments when her memory had gaps, and filled those gaps with ready-made explanations. Vance showed me a copy of a reverse mortgage file. My signature was on it. Very convincing. Convincing enough that if I didn't stare at it long enough, even I might have believed it was mine. Rosalind's signature was there too. Lighter than usual, more unsteady, but still familiar. I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. The kind of cold you feel when you realize the rudder has been removed from your ship. Vance continued, his voice steady like he was describing a case that didn't involve us. Sloane was in debt. Not a small amount. The kind that comes from spending beyond control. Her lenders didn't show up in suits. They showed up with terrifying patience. Wyatt was caught in the middle. Wife on one side, parents on the other. And he chose silence to keep his balance. But silence in this case meant standing with the one doing the pushing. I asked Vance if there was anything else. He nodded. This time he opened the folder. An insurance policy. Under my name. Large. Value. Short term. Beneficiary. Sloane. I looked at the signing date. I wasn't in Savannah that day. I was walking along the river with Rosalind. There were photos. Receipts. Clear timestamps. But the signature was still there. Vance didn't use harsh words. He just said, "This kind of thing is usually used when someone needs a quick exit." I closed the folder. I didn't ask more questions. Not because I was afraid, but because I could see the picture clearly enough. On the drive home, I thought about the apartment in Atlanta. New furniture. Wide balcony. City lights. A place with no memories. No old photos. No scent of riverwood in the walls. A place paid for with the silence of 2 old people. That evening I watched Rosalind more closely. She sat in her chair, knitting. Sometimes she paused, looked at me as if trying to piece together a fragment of memory. I didn't speak. I just sat a little closer. My phone vibrated. A message from Sloane. She asked if I had considered the proposal about transferring responsibility. She said everything would be simpler for everyone. I set the phone down. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the safe. I took out the original documents. The ones I once believed didn't need much protection. I photographed them, organized them, and noted every small detail. Not to strike back right away, but to prepare. A few days later, Sloane came by alone. She brought fruit, spoke softly. She talked about the new apartment, the view, how the kids were adjusting so well to city life. Rosalind listened, nodded, then asked, "Have we ever been there?" Sloane smiled, a very quick smile. Then she said, "We have Mom. You just forgot." I remembered that moment. Not her words, but the way she cut through Rosalind's memory as if it were a page she could simply replace. That night I called Vance again. I told him I was ready. He asked, ready for what I said, ready for them to believe I'm tired. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you want to end a dirty game, sometimes you have to let the other side believe they've already won." I looked around the house. The photos. The old scratches on the railing. I thought about that apartment. And I understood then, what they had really bought wasn't just concrete and glass. They bought my absence. And if that was what they wanted, I would let them feel what it's like to walk into a house they believe already belongs to them, only to find it has been waiting to be exposed. I began to slow down. On purpose. No objections. No more questions. I let Sloane believe what she was seeing was real exhaustion. An old man finally reaching his limit. I called Wyatt first. This time he picked up. I told him my health wasn't good, that I didn't want to handle paperwork anymore, that I needed to get everything organized and simplified. On the other end of the line, I heard a quiet exhale, like a weight had just been lifted. 2 days later, Sloane showed up with a man in a dark suit. She introduced him as her personal lawyer. Her voice was lower, more careful now, but her eyes couldn't hide the excitement. She said I was thinking clearly, and just in time, I invited them into the living room. Rosalind sat beside me, hands resting on her lap, eyes drifting. I saw Sloane glance at her briefly, then look away as if she was already used to Rosalind no longer being a factor. I said I wanted a proper meeting, a small dinner, like a farewell to old responsibilities, I said. Sloane nodded immediately. Wyatt hesitated for a second, then nodded too. That evening I set the table in the dining room. No flowers, no music, just enough light. I wanted everything visible, no shadows. Sloane placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. She explained each section, each line in a carefully practiced, patient tone. She said this was the best way, the fastest way, the least stressful option for Rosalind. I listened to everything. I didn't interrupt. I asked only one question. If I sign, does it all end here? She smiled and said, Of course. I stood up and walked to the file cabinet. I brought out another folder and placed it beside hers. Sloane froze for just a moment, then kept smiling. She thought they were just old documents. I opened my folder first. I didn't raise my voice. I read slowly, line by line. The reverse mortgage copy, the signing date, the amount, the money routed through an intermediary company. I paused right as I looked at Wyatt. His face drained of color. He understood immediately. Sloane's lawyer sat up straight. He started asking questions. I didn't answer. I simply turned to the next page. Recorded conversations. Nothing dramatic. Just everyday language. About placing Rosalind in a more cost-effective facility. About speeding things up. About how Ben isn't as sharp as he used to be. The room grew so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Sloane jumped to her feet. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said someone was manipulating me. She turned to Wyatt, called his name. Wyatt didn't look at her. He lowered his head. I turned to the final page. The insurance policy. My name, a forged signature, the beneficiary. I didn't need to explain. Placing it on the table was enough. Sloane reached for the papers as if to pull them back, and at that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Vance walked in with two others. No noise, no rush, just enough presence to change the air in the room. Sloane's lawyer stood up, demanding clarification. Vance showed his credentials and said there were a few questions that needed to be answered elsewhere. Rosalind looked up then. She glanced around, then at me. She asked softly, "We're at home, right?" I took her hand. I told her yes. Wyatt dropped to his knees. No one told him to. He just collapsed there, tears hitting the wooden floor. He said he was sorry. Said he didn't think it would go this far. Said he only wanted to keep the family together. I looked at my son for a long time. I wasn't angry. I didn't comfort him either. I said one sentence, slow and clear. You let someone else put a price on your parents. That was your choice. Sloane was escorted out of the house. She didn't look at me anymore. She looked around instead, as if she still couldn't believe this was how it ended. When the door closed, the house became strangely quiet. Not an empty silence, but the kind that comes after a long pressure finally lifts. I sat down. My body felt drained, but my mind was clear. I knew I had just closed a door, not only on Sloane, but on the version of myself who once believed silence would preserve peace. Rosalind rested her head on my shoulder. She didn't ask questions. There are things she doesn't need to remember, and things I will remember for her. Outside, river wind moved across the porch. I knew that after this night there was no going back. But for the first time in months, I no longer felt pushed aside. I didn't win with strength. I simply stood still, at the right moment, and let the truth step into the light on its own. After that night, I didn't take a single step toward confrontation. I had said what needed to be said. The rest no longer belonged to my emotions. It belonged to the natural order of life. The days that followed were quiet. Sloane didn't come back. Wyatt didn't either. I didn't wait. Some distances, once opened, don't need words to fill them. They exist on their own, as consequences. I focused on Rosalind. Every morning I made her tea and sat across from her. I repeated simple things. What the weather was like, where we were, who I was. Some days she remembered. Some days she just smiled and trusted me without remembering. I learned to accept both. I called an independent advisor, not to hold on to everything, but to arrange it in a way no one could touch with practiced charm. The river house was revalued. Part of the assets went into a trust for the grandchildren. Wyatt's name and Sloane's appeared nowhere in any position of control. I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it out of responsibility. When everything was clear on paper, I began thinking about leaving. This house held too many memories to keep living as if nothing had happened. I didn't want every wall to repeat an old question. I sold the estate quietly. No parties, no goodbyes. Just a decision. We moved to a coastal community where the wind is steady and people are used to living slowly. There, Rosalind was cared for properly. No rushing, no cold note-taking. Just people who knew how to listen. Some afternoons, she sat on the porch watching the waves. She would ask if we were on vacation. I told her yes. And in a way, I don't think I was wrong. Vance stopped by from time to time. He didn't say much about what was happening behind the scenes. I didn't ask. I only knew that some doors had closed, and this time they weren't opening again. One day I received a letter from Wyatt. Not long, no excuses. Just an apology and a line saying he was trying to fix what he still could. I read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply right away. Not out of bitterness, but because some answers need time to become real. Rosalind doesn't remember Wyatt often, but whenever she sees photos of the kids, she still smiles. I keep those smiles. I don't tell her things she doesn't need to know. She gave me a full lifetime already. The rest, I'll carry. Some nights I sit alone, looking out at the sea. I think about that anniversary dinner. 2 empty chairs, 1 cold message. If it weren't for that night, I might still be believing everything was fine, until I no longer had the strength to respond. I came to understand something late, but clearly, family isn't something you preserve through endless tolerance. When someone starts seeing you as a number, your job isn't to beg them to remember who you are. It's to remind yourself to stand upright. Rosalind steps out onto the porch and takes my hand. She asks what I'm thinking about. I tell her I'm listening to the waves. She nods, as if that answer is enough. I don't need to prove anything anymore. No victory, no recognition. I just need to know that when everything was tested, I didn't trade my dignity to hold on to a version of love that had already warped. Life after 70 isn't about starting over. It's about living what remains, with integrity. If you're listening to this story and wondering what you would do in that situation, I don't have grand advice. I only know one thing. When your silence is being used against you, speak once. Not to destroy anyone, but to protect the value of who you are. I did that. And for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully, knowing the door I closed was the door that led to a calmer life for both of us. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for taking the time to listen. If it made you think, please like, subscribe, and share, so others who may be in a similar place know they are not alone. The lesson I took from all this is simple. Family is where love begins, but dignity is something no one has the right to take away, not even those closest to you. When you learn to value yourself, you don't lose real family. You only filter out what was false. Thank you for being here, and I wish you the clarity to protect the most important values of your life.